The Cali Libertarian podcast releases new episodes every Tuesday, so be sure to become a subscriber today and hit that notification bell so you don't miss any new uploads. So we now know that Joe Biden has officially taken office yesterday, and if you know Joe, you know it wouldn't be too long before the tyrant settles in. By that, of course, I mean signing new tyrannical laws. And you'd be right, because that's exactly what he did. Now, according to a report from Forbes, Biden plans to sign executive orders such as rejoining the Paris Climate Accord, which has knowingly failed in the past to do anything to protect the environment and mitigate climate change. Biden seems to be focused on undoing what Trump did in the past, and not focused enough on whether or not any of that stuff will actually do anything good for the American people. Now, rejoining that accord is really just a stunt that media figureheads will continue to cheer and lie to you as if rejoining this accord means that Biden actually cares about the environment, when in reality, all he really cares about is control for his environmentalist agenda. His next executive order is to rejoin another terrible organization that has changed up so much that they might as well be the walking definition of a contradiction, and that is the group known as the WHO. Now, do I really even need to explain why this is a terrible idea? I mean, it should be obvious that he has every intention to make sure that he can fully mandate tyrannical laws because these WHO, quote, experts, unquote, told him so. And I really don't want to spend too much time on this EO, so let's move on to the next one, which is the lift of the travel ban. So I might get a lot of flack for not being in support of the travel ban being in place, but that's just because I'm a staunch libertarian. I believe in freedom of movement. However, let me just tell you right now, with Biden and the rest of the Democrats, this is not just a move for freedom of movement. This is a move to actively import immigrants to the country, which is not supported by the libertarian philosophy. We're talking about being able to just come over, not actively importing immigrants, which is most likely going to be their plan going forward. Mark my word. As for the Dreamers and military ban, I personally don't have anything to say about those. They don't seem too problematic for me, at least, so I'll let you guys post in the comment section what your thoughts are on that. So without further ado, let's move on to something that's a much bigger problem and a much bigger threat to liberty, and, well, here it is. Now, for this second portion of the podcast, I was planning on talking about mask mandates, but then I saw on Twitter this video, and I just really couldn't leave this out. Take a listen.
The members of the Biden team who have been nominated or have been appointed are now moving in laser-like fashion to try to uncover as much as they can about what looks very similar to insurgency movements that we've seen overseas, where they germinate in different parts of a country and they gain strength, and it brings together an unholy alliance frequently of religious extremists, authoritarians, fascists, bigots, racists, nativists, even libertarians.
Did you catch that? Let's play it again.
It brings together an unholy alliance frequently of religious extremists, authoritarians, fascists, bigots, racists, nativists, even libertarians.
Okay, so not only does he use terms like bigot, racist, fascist, authoritarians, like these terms aren't being used these days to basically say that anybody who anyone disagrees with who's a leftist can basically call them these things. There's no nuance with these people. You're either with them or you're an authoritarian, fascist, dictator, racist, bigot person. Like, that's who they'll label you as, even if you're not really that person. And honestly, that brings me to another point, which is about the fact that unity can't happen. It really isn't going to happen because many people, no matter which side they might align on, they don't want to unite with the opposing side. They want to be as far away from them as possible, if anything, which actually really brings to the idea of secession. That's really what's going on right now, is what people actually want, even though they're not saying it out loud. I think most people don't want to unite with people they disagree with, especially at this point in the country. Right now, at this point in the country, we are not at a uniting point. We're not going to get to a uniting point. What we are going to get to, most likely, is secession. And I've been saying this since long before the election. If you follow me on Twitter at Libertarian Cali, you'd know that that's what's going to happen. And by the way, to the point of his labeling when it comes to like the racist, the sexist, bigot, whatever his labels were when he said that, do you know this is how exactly they win? They win by using these labels because nobody wants to be associated with somebody who's a racist or a bigot or whatever you might call them, like these negative terms, an authoritarian, a fascist, whatever it might be. They don't want to associate with that. And so they'll come up with these terms and label you these, even if they're so loosely defined. It doesn't matter. They'll make it so that that the audience doesn't have to do much thinking. The experts that they'll say will do the thinking for them. And that's another point. When it came to this pandemic, everyone who disagreed with the lockdown strategy was labeled as this anti-truth person. If you look at me on Twitter, you'll see that I'm talking about how when they reverse their positions entirely and they're going to pretend like they've always believed this, by the way. That's how it works. They'll reverse their positions entirely and then pretend like they always believed it. And then if anybody questions it, they're going to be labeled anti-truth. Oh, it's anti-science. They're going to be conspiracy theorists. You're a conspiracy theorist. That's the thing. Nobody wants to be anti-truth. Nobody wants to be anti-science. Nobody wants to actually be a conspiracy theorist because conspiracy theorists are usually the ones that are wrong. It's that, and that's the thing. They'll basically label anybody else as on the wrong side, even if there's no proof of that. That's why I say that they're using experts, and I put that in air quotes, of course. They use experts to try and label these things so that if anybody disagrees, they're disagreeing with experts. How can you disagree with experts? They're in the field for a reason. These guys know what they're talking about. You can never disagree with them until they're being used by the mainstream media to send a message out there that this is what their plan is. This is what you have to agree with. Otherwise, again, conspiracy theorists, anti-truth, anti-science, yada, yada, yada. You know what it is. Now, my theory, or at least conspiracy theory, according to the mainstream media, about why they're doing this, it's because it allows people to think less. And I think I've said this earlier. It allows them to think less and it lets them define whatever the experts say and then let them do the thinking for them. It creates a lazy society. This is what they aim for. A society that's lazy, a society that's dependent. This is what happens when a society is free from critical thought and people who aren't, people who are critically thinking are thrown out of society. They're the ones that are canceled, in air quotes, of course, because that's what society is referring to anybody who goes outside of the matrix. They're just canceled. And this lack of individual thought, like I said in just a minute ago, is that it creates a dependent society. So yeah, if we get to that point, it's basically, by you libertarians, you've been asked these questions like, who's going to build the roads? Who's going to build the roads? Well, just wait for the questions of, without government, who will feed our children? Who will give me clothing? Who will provide me a job? Who will educate me? Although you could argue these questions have already been asked. If you've been on Libertarian Twitter for a while, you know that these questions have been asked. Like, they can't educate themselves or build their own roads or, feed their own children or, clothe themselves. Apparently, because without government, you can't do anything on your own at this point. And that's what they're aiming for. They're aiming for something like this. This is all a strategy, and you guys are being sadly subjugated to become a part of it or to be expunged from society. That's where we're at this point. Liking this podcast so far? Make sure to let me know by leaving a like on this video. Also, consider subscribing if you haven't already. I have to tell you, as a Californian, the truly unruly behavior of Gavin Newsom, his hypocrisy on the rules that he's enforced, how he excludes certain industries from said rules, and his obvious horrendous lockdown strategy in general has me very angry that we may never recover from this. But that's not what I'm going to talk about today in this section of the podcast. This time there's good news. As lockdown measures grow, more businesses continue to rail against it. And as a libertarian, I couldn't be more proud, since this means that more people are finally waking up to the fact that Newsom's orders are derailing businesses. Now, reopening is important because, as this lady from San Diego puts it, they need to feed their families. And I mean, it really shows you how arbitrarily deeming what's essential versus what's not essential creates a very large wealth transfer that only affects the small businesses, and it goes up to the big corporations that have aligned themselves with government. Does that sound familiar? Well, it should, because that sounds a lot like fascism, because that's what it is. It's when you have government aligning themselves with big corporations at the expense of everyone else, or just aligning themselves with big corporations in general. That's how fascism starts, right? And so, meanwhile, while small business owners are seeing this happening and have starving children to feed, seeing this kind of news really does help, and it is much needed in our dystopian state. And that's going to do it for today's episode, guys. Thank you so much for watching to the end, and I hope to see you in the next episode. Be safe and live freely. The Cali Libertarian podcast releases new episodes every Tuesday, so be sure to become a subscriber today and hit that notification bell so you don't miss any new uploads.